All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So I just want to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Heather Gately. I'm Director of Media and Communications for the Nature Conservancy in California. And I'm here with my colleagues, Peter Vandenberg, North Coast Restoration Manager, and Amy Campbell, Project Director for the California Water Program. And I can see from the chat that many of you are very familiar with the Nature Conservancy, or TNC as we say in shorthand. But just to give a quick overview and provide some background for anyone who's new, TNC is a global conservation organization working for over 70 years to conserve the land and water on which all life depends. We are a science-led organization, and we employ over 4,000 multidisciplinary conservation professionals, including over 900 scientists. We work in a wide array of ecosystems and cultures across 79 countries around the world. And we work to develop and deploy conservation solutions that work for both nature and people, and to scale up our successes by leveraging our global reach as an organization. So to date, TNC has actually protected over 280 million square miles of ocean and more than 125 million acres of land. And that's just part of what we do. So California is very key to the Nature Conservancy's success globally. Our state is a living laboratory where new conservation solutions are developed and shared with the world. California is a biodiversity hotspot, and it rivals the world's coral reefs and tropical forests. We also have the world's fifth largest economy, conservation-aware voters, and an innovation culture that's driven world-changing advances in technology. These factors combine to create extraordinary enabling conditions for conservation breakthroughs. At TNC in California, we have a vision for our state where nature is abundant and resilient in a rapidly changing world. And today we're honing in on an iconic California species that needs our help so that they can be part of that future, and that's salmon. So why do we care so much about salmon? Well, salmon are born in rivers, mature in the ocean, and return to rivers to mate, making them a foundational part of California's vast coastal ecosystems. And they also provide nutrients to hundreds of other plants and animals. They act as a canary in the coal mine, what we call an indicator species, which means their health can tell us about the health of our rivers and streams. Salmon also provide an important food source and thousands of jobs in our state and have deep cultural meaning to many native California tribes. And their yearly migrations have inspired cultures for thousands and thousands of years. Today, most populations of coho and Chinook salmon, as well as steelhead trout, are listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act as threatened or endangered. But our conservation today is going to focus specifically on our efforts to help coho. So coho were once part of one of California's greatest migrations, with sheer numbers outstripping those in more well-known migrations like the Serengeti, with an estimated 5.5 million salmon returning annually to California rivers. And as recently as the 1960s, 500,000 coho still came back to California to spawn. But now coho are at 1% of that number. We're determined to make sure coho have a future in California, and we're making real progress toward that goal. So we're going to focus today's talk on work happening in two locations that give us hope. Peter is going to talk about restoration work on the North Coast, and specifically in the 10 Mile River, where this year's salmon populations have just surpassed the federal recovery goals. And Amy is going to talk about our work in the Klamath Basin. You might be thinking of the Klamath already because the largest dam removal in US history just happened there, opening up 400 miles of available streams. Of course, this is just part of the work that TNC is doing, and that touches on salmon. We work in other rivers and streams in California and in the ocean. But the projects Amy and Peter are going to share are critical to our mission because we believe we can scale this work through policy and science to make a big impact far beyond these specific areas. Now, before we dive into these projects, our experts are going to give you a window into two options for what the future of salmon might look like. Peter's going to show you what it could look like if we scale up this work and invest in our rivers. And Amy's going to show you the future we might have if we leave our rivers behind. So Peter, take us into the future.
All right. Let's imagine that it's a winter day in 2055 and you're walking alongside a river in Northern California. What do you hear? First, there's the birds, warblers chirping, a faraway woodpecker, the unmistakable peal of an osprey. Other animals, too, rustling unseen through the ground cover. A breeze moves through the towering redwood canopy, and the buzz of insects is audible, and probably more than a little bit annoying, but that's also a sign of a productive environment and a really healthy food web. And then there's the river itself, with its flow buoyed by recent winter rains. Sometimes you can tell that a river is healthy solely by the sound of it. You can hear water flowing into a natural jam of redwoods that have fallen into the stream, carving out deep pools and driving the processes that have formed riverscapes over millennia. And just upstream, you can also hear the distinct sound of a riffle, where shallow, fast-running water helps sort the gravels that are perfect for salmon spawning. What you see also reveals an ecosystem in balance. You watch the river as it meanders back and forth across the broad valley, splitting into multiple channels here and there, free to spread across the landscape. Large wood jams help create complex flow paths while also offering much needed shelter for juvenile fish. And you can see adult coho migrating upstream. You've heard that there's a time when this was a rare sight, but right now you feel closer to those stories that are even older, when it was said that you could walk across the river on the backs of salmon. More importantly, how do you understand the river? You know it to be dynamic and ever-shifting, and its changes are as familiar and welcome as the turning of the seasons. When heavy rains come and water fills the nearby floodplain, you're content to watch it spread out and flow before it seeps back into the earth to replenish the groundwater below. And what do you feel? It's probably that rare and profound quiet peace that you get when you're down here in a river valley among the redwood giants, and you're part of a system that's in balance.
So now let's say you approach that same stretch of river in 2055, but people have made very different choices about how we treat nature. The riverbed you see is long, straight channel, a line that's created by humans to move water quickly from point A to point B. There's only a trickle of water running through it because the rest has been diverted to other uses. The riverbanks and surrounding forests are parched, and only a few trees are still standing. The air is quiet because there isn't enough nature left there to support birds and wildlife, and all the wild salmon are gone. How do you understand this future? Do you see it as a commodity, something to be bought or sold and spent until it's gone? When the heavy rains come, are they an inconvenience to be dealt with as quickly as possible? And is nature an afterthought, treated as a luxury until it disappears and becomes only a memory or a myth? Fortunately, we still have time to decide what our future looks like. And at TNC, we're really invested in making Peter's vision of the future a reality. We're working in both coastal and inland watersheds to restore habitat, remove fish barriers, and leave more water in our streams and rivers for nature. With so many rivers in California and the needs so large, we need to choose the places we invest in wisely, because deep engagement in a place takes time. But with a rapidly changing climate, time is of the essence. So we need to ensure that our efforts are both achieving tangible changes in the rivers that we invest in, and that we're using those places to advance solutions and science that can be utilized elsewhere. Peter's going to tell us about a project that does exactly that.
So TNC's North Coast Restoration Project is centered on the coast of Mendocino County. We have a particular emphasis on creating the type of habitat that endangered coho salmon need to survive our increasingly variable winters. To achieve this, we focus on specific watersheds that, given enough conservation investment, have real potential to become strongholds for salmon. These are the places that give us the greatest opportunity to sustain wild runs of coho, even when they begin to blink out elsewhere. The three watersheds that we're currently focused on are the 10 Mile, Navarro, and Garcia. Within these priority watersheds, we've further narrowed our focus to their lower alluvial valleys. When you think about the physical form of a watershed, typically in wet months, water comes barreling down the ridges, and historically it would hit these valley bottoms and then spread out and slow down. This is where you would find the best winter habitat for fish, in the form of floodplains and interconnected streams and wetlands, which provide incredibly rich feeding grounds as well as refuge from fast-flowing storms. And under historical conditions, when these watersheds were home to ancient old-growth redwood forests with broad, undeveloped coastal river valleys, the fish thrived. This integrated system of forest, river, and salmon evolved together over millennia and was meticulously stewarded by indigenous peoples. But that balance has been disrupted. The arrival of European and American settlers brought wave after wave of disturbance. The redwood forests that defined Mendocino County and the coast were repeatedly clear-cut, and just about every single old-growth tree was removed. It might be hard to see on your screens, but there's a person standing in the bottom right of this photograph. That gives you a sense of scale. This was an old-growth forest, clear-cut, to make lumber to build our cities and towns. The intensity of disturbance accelerated after World War II, when mechanized equipment ushered in a new era of industrial logging. Entire watersheds were denuded, leaving hillsides of stumps and bare soil. Streams and rivers were packed with logging debris, turned into roads or splash dammed to store and transport logs. And it wasn't just logging. The river valleys provided flat land and rich soil for agriculture, so rivers were bermed and leveed, and sometimes they were rerouted entirely to make space for grazing and crops. This created a sharp artificial divide between land and water. And then the region experienced numerous huge floods. Sediment from hillsides that were left bare by logging was washed down into the valleys, covering stream beds and burying the floodplains. Rivers were subsequently cleared of all wood, reducing them to long, featureless glides devoid of structure and complexity. The result is that we've systematically altered the natural functioning of these watersheds at every scale, from river mouth all the way up to the highest ridges. So on the Mendocino coast, the primary issue we have is degraded habitat. In a sense, we're lucky, because despite this legacy of disturbance, most of these rivers remain undammed and relatively undeveloped. So the key to recovering coho in this geography is habitat restoration, and a lot of it. Coho salmon have very specific habitat needs, in part because of their distinct 3-year life cycles. They're born higher up in watersheds in the early spring, and the juvenile fish then have to survive for a full year in the freshwater environment. After which they migrate out to the ocean, where they stay for about another 1.5 years, and then they return to their natal streams to spawn and die. But that year in the freshwater is critical for these little salmon. They're tiny when they emerge, and they have to survive a long, dry summer, followed by a winter, where big storms and high flows are common. And all the while, they need to be feeded, because the larger they are when they go out to the ocean, the greater chance they'll have of surviving. Basically, when you're a fish, the bigger you are, the fewer mouths you fit in. Fortunately, California's North Coast is home to a long and proud history of restoration by a huge variety of folks, including tribes, community groups, nonprofits, and public agencies. And a lot of the early restoration effort was focused on restoring low-flow summer habitat. So while big strides have been made in that arena, we're currently focused on the other side of the coin, restoring habitat for our increasingly variable winters. This focus is informed by science, as we learned over time through seasonal habitat modeling and other studies that a lack of winter habitat is actually the primary factor limiting the survival of coho in these watersheds. Winter's a dangerous time for juvenile fish. They're so small, just a couple inches, and being caught in a simplified stream during a big winter storm can be deadly. To survive, they need accumulations of large woody debris in the stream, providing complex structure, little hidey holes, and shelter from predators. And they need floodplain and side channel habitat, which essentially serve as off-ramps during storms. Floodplains in particular are awesome, because during storms, while the main channel is raging, they become inundated with really slow-moving water, offering the perfect refuge for juvenile coho. And they're also rich feeding habitat, basically big bug buffets that give access to a wide range of food sources. So we've set out to restore exactly that type of habitat. Our efforts have 3 prongs: land protection, planning and science, and large-scale restoration. The first step was to conserve land, and to date, we've either directly acquired or helped partners protect nearly 30,000 acres of critical salmon habitat on the Mendocino coast, including nearly the entire lower 10-mile and critical segments of the Garcia. With the land protected, we initiated comprehensive planning processes. Working with scientists, engineers, and restoration experts, we studied these areas in depth, from land use to hydrology to fish utilization and behavior. And we used that information to stitch together a blueprint for systematic restoration at a landscape scale. With this blueprint in hand, we then moved into the active restoration phase. Over the last 6 years, we've constructed 5 large-scale restoration projects across the 10 Mile and Garcia rivers, including one that we finished just a couple weeks ago. Each one of these projects is focused on recreating floodplains and constructing enormous large wood structures. And with each round of restoration, we learn and adapt, using rigorous monitoring to assess how the projects function and to study how coho use them. We then incorporate those lessons into the next project, leveraging our lands as a kind of restoration laboratory where we test techniques and export best practices. One of the big questions we wrangle with is, how do we work with nature to accomplish restoration at scale? Maybe it's possible to set up the conditions to allow nature to do this work instead of just doing it all with big yellow machines. So with each successive project, we're experimenting with that end in mind. It's difficult because these watersheds were degraded through industrial means, and they're locked into these unnatural, low-functioning states. It takes a bit of a push to restore them, but I'm optimistic that through innovation and experimentation, we can find ways to help nature do more of this work. So where do we go from here? We've established a blueprint for implementing restoration at a rapid pace, and now we need to scale it up. To that end, we received a large NOAA grant to do just that. We're expanding into the Navarro watershed and are dramatically stepping up our ongoing programs in both the 10 Mile and the Garcia. And next summer, we plan to build 2 more projects, one of which will be the largest we've ever constructed. The goal is to implement on-the-ground restoration at a pace and scale that's commensurate with the challenges that we face. Coho salmon have been teetering on the brink of extinction in California, and if we want a future that includes them, then we have to do everything we can to save them. The good news is that we're starting to see some indications of success. Last winter, an estimated 5,574 adult coho salmon returned to spawn in the 10 Mile. That's by far the highest number we've seen since we started this work. It also exceeds the recovery target that the agency set for the watershed. Now, we won't consider coho actually recovered until we see consistent numbers like this year after year, but it's a really good start. The adult fish returning to spawn last winter were the offspring of our previous record year in 2020. Conditions held throughout their life cycle, both in the river and out in the ocean, and as a result, a lot of those fish survived and successfully made it back. And now, this spring and summer, the watershed is filled to the brim with little baby coho. They're all over the place, happily hanging out in our restoration reaches, feeding and getting big old bellies. If all goes well, these fish will grow up, go out to sea, and return in 2026. And hopefully that year, we'll set a new record for adult coho returning to the 10 Mile. You see, salmon restoration is a numbers game, and there's an enormous array of factors that affect survival across every stage of their life cycle. But the number of coho that we're seeing in the 10 Mile this year is a really good indication that we're on the right track. We recently made a brief 90-second video that tells the story a lot better than I can, so we'll play that for you now, and I hope you enjoy.
Thanks, Peter. What an amazing story and what great work. So while the restoration of habitat is absolutely essential to salmon survival, it's also critical that these rivers have enough water. And in California, that can be a huge challenge. Inadequate stream flows are a large problem, and we are tackling that in the Klamath River Basin. The Klamath watershed is the third largest along the Pacific continental coast. Its 12,000 square miles extend from the high desert of southern Oregon, just south of Crater Lake National Park, to the temperate redwood forests of Northern California. The Upper Basin supports one of the largest lake and wetland complexes in the US and is an important stopover for migratory birds along the Pacific Flyway. Downstream, the Klamath is home to numerous aquatic species like salmon, who are not only an economic driver for the commercial fishing industries off the Pacific coast, but have also been an essential food and spiritual source for more than 5 indigenous tribes in the Klamath since time immemorial. On August 28th of this year, so just a few weeks ago, the Klamath River became a free-flowing river for the first time in 100 years. In the last 10 months, 4 large hydroelectric dams have been removed from the main stem Klamath, providing salmon access to over 400 miles of habitat that had been previously inaccessible. This largest dam removal effort in United States history would not have been possible if it weren't for the leadership of multiple tribes in the basin. Now, federal and state agencies are looking for ways to bolster fish populations. They have focused their attention on the Scott and Shasta River watersheds as the seed source for repopulating the Upper Klamath. Both of these watersheds still have native salmon, although their populations are struggling due to limited habitat and low stream flows. TNC has a long history of working with water rights to rebalance the water use in the Klamath Basin and throughout California. This includes working to understand and quantify how much water nature needs in every stream in the state. Our approach involves changing how we use water, managing groundwater use, and reoperating targeted dams to provide more flows to downstream rivers. As you might have guessed, returning water back to nature in a state that has the 5th largest global economy and provides the US with over 1/3 of our country's vegetables and 3/4 of our country's fruits and nuts isn't easy. But we know that something has to be done because nature's telling us the balance isn't right. Case in point, the 2002 fish kill in the Klamath. 20+ years ago, stream flows were low and salmon were beginning to enter the Klamath River, navigating to their ancestral homes to spawn. But low flows and elevated water temperatures resulted in as many as 34,000 and some say as high as 70,000 Chinook salmon dying on the banks of the Klamath River. Today, while the Scott and Shasta River salmon are still present, they aren't doing well. And our farming communities are hurting due to droughts and changing climate. Commercial fishing industries are suffering, and subsistence fishing for tribes is severely limited. All of these events are telling us that our natural and human communities are out of balance and that big changes are needed. Finding solutions to rebalance the water use is complex. It demands that we have hard conversations with our neighbors and in our communities. In all reality, less water needs to be diverted from our rivers and ground, and California needs to increase regulation to ensure that water is left in streams so we can rebuild our salmon populations across the state. In the Scott and Shasta River watersheds, TNC is working to change water use through the acquisition of properties that have water rights. Our goal is to purchase properties to leave water rights in stream, protect freshwater species, restore aquatic habitat, and ultimately reduce that regulatory burden that's currently being felt by our local communities. For example, last year, TNC purchased a 389-acre ranch along French Creek, located in the Scott River watershed. It's a creek that is credited to be one of the largest producers of coho salmon in the Klamath Basin. Our goals for the acquisition are to leave the property's cold water rights in stream by not using them for irrigation, converting the irrigated fields to upland habitat, and restoring a mile of stream along French Creek. But prior to this purchase of the property, we thought about the trade-offs around taking water off the landscape and the potential benefits or impacts that this might have to our local communities. Ultimately, we decided that for this particular property, the impact to the local agricultural economy was minimal, but the opportunity to increase flows and bolster habitat for coho were high. In the Shasta watershed, however, TNC will be acquiring a 5,300-acre cattle ranch in less than a month. This property includes 7 miles of Parks Creek, another important coho salmon stream and also has very numerous water rights. This is a large property in the Shasta Valley that does support the local economy. So for this property, our objectives are to maintain some of the property's economic viability while working to restore habitat and augment flows in stream as much as we can. In both of these cases, the water we rededicate in stream, coupled with the restoration of habitat, will ultimately relieve some of the regulatory pressures being felt by this local community. At this point, you're probably asking, if we can do it in the Klamath, why can't we do it statewide? And we can, and here's what we're doing. 96% of the state of California streams and rivers don't have rules that require a certain amount of water to be left in stream for nature. The Scott and Shasta watersheds are one of few places in the state where they're starting to have such requirements. So through our science and now firsthand experience with property ownership, TNC is learning how these regulations are being implemented, and we're bringing the science to inform future and permanent flow rules elsewhere. This work, coupled with the work Peter and his team are doing, demonstrates what works and what doesn't work so that we can export these lessons to other rivers in California. I personally have been working in the Klamath now for over 20 years, and I've learned that perseverance, patience, long-term commitment, and even a little bit of moxie, changes can happen. The removal of the dams on the Klamath this year was a culmination of over 30 years of leadership and perseverance by the Klamath Basin tribes, NGOs, and federal and state agencies. TNC's work, along with numerous other projects underway, both big and small by partners, gives me hope that future generations will see growing populations of salmon that are coexisting and thriving with human communities throughout the entire Klamath Basin.
Thanks, Amy. It's great to be able to share these stories about some of the exciting work happening here at TNC to conserve salmon. The projects that Amy and I talked about are just a small slice of our overall strategy. The really exciting part is that we aren't alone. There are so many folks out there doing amazing work to save salmon in California, including tribes, other nonprofits, local, state, and federal agencies, and countless individuals and community groups. Many of these groups are our partners, and all of us are working towards the same vision of a California where salmon thrive. Both of the future scenarios that we described earlier are absolutely possible. They aren't even that far away. But at TNC, we're confident that we have the science and vision needed to create the good future. It's just a matter of building the momentum to make it possible. So that's what makes an event like this so special. There are so many people on this call who care about salmon and who care about our rivers, because if we want to get to that good future, it's going to take all of us. So thank you for being here.
Thank you both so much for sharing your work. With the time we have left, I'd love to give folks an opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll answer as many as we can. But I have a question to kick us off, and just wondering, I'd love to hear from each of you, what's the next big thing that you're excited about?
With the removal of the dams, I am super excited to see how quickly we start seeing salmon moving up into the upper basin and into those 400 miles of previously inaccessible parts of the basin. There's an effort by the Karuk tribe and the Yurok tribe and several NGOs to start tracking fish. I just got an email yesterday that our first Chinook salmon hit the Shasta River on the September 8th, which is super exciting because if they're already up this high in the Shasta, they're moving up. And I just am really going to be really curious to watch how Mother Nature fixes herself. I think she's going to do it a lot quicker than we anticipate. And there's a lot of people out there watching and tracking, will be tracking fish as they start migrating up. So I'm just super excited to watch what happens.
Yeah, that work up on the Klamath is incredibly inspiring to me. So the adult spawning return numbers that I shared for the 10 mile, where we had 5,500 fish this year, those numbers just came out on Monday. So I think I'm going to take a little time to be excited and happy about that and celebrate it, because it's not often in conservation work that we get these types of like wins. You know, usually we're working for something that's far away in the future. So that's something I'm really excited about. And then looking forward into the future, I'm really excited about the projects we're going to build next year on the 10 mile. They're going to be bigger than any we've ever done. They'll be complex and pretty cool. So I'm excited to get those in the ground and see how they mature over time and how fish use them, and hopefully continue to benefit from them.
Great, thank you. I have a couple questions that are sort of related, so I'm going to try to sort of bank them. But the first question is, are salmon sensitive to water temperatures such that heat waves are a threat? And then the other question is, how much of an issue is increasing water temperature? Are there other strategies to address this besides increasing water flows?
I'll just jump in real quick before you can talk about this more, Amy. But yeah, salmon are definitely sensitive to water temperatures, especially coho. They're pretty, of the three species between Chinook, steelhead trout, and coho are the most sensitive. So they have pretty distinct requirements for temperatures that they can withstand in rivers. We're lucky on the North Coast because these are smaller coastal streams that have generally good flow through the year and good riparian cover, that temperature usually isn't a limiting factor for their survival in the 10 mile and some of the other watersheds that we work in.
Yeah, and water temperature is a huge issue for salmon in the Shasta River watershed. The Shasta is a spring-fed system, so it has a really good, that quantity of water year-round. But unfortunately, given just the climate that the Shasta's in, it is semi-arid north of Mount Shasta. So in the rain shadow effect of the mountain itself, it doesn't receive a lot of precipitation. It is really arid, and so during the summer, the water temperature gets really high. So in many ways, trying to identify where those cold spring sources are and maximizing the cold water temperature benefits in those areas, leaving more cold water in stream as opposed to just any water in stream is a priority for us in the Shasta. Because for coho that have to spend an entire summer in this really arid environment as little juveniles, temperature is just one of the biggest factors that they're dealing with.
Another question is sort of, I think, related around that sort of restoration. What about reforestation of riverbanks? Increasing flow and increasing stream complexity are essential, but so is the overhanging tree canopy. Can you speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can jump in there as well. Yeah, it's critically important. And I think part of the reason why we're seeing in the 10 mile specifically, we're seeing coho numbers build over time is because the forest is repairing itself now that we're recovering from the era of industrial logging. And there's still logging out there, but it's better regulated and the practices are better and the timber companies are better. So getting shade and tree cover along the streams is enormously important. And I think that's been a big factor in addition to all the active restoration that's going on. We acquired a series of conservation easements in the 10 mile. And one of the first things we did was put up fencing to exclude cattle from the river because they were keeping all the growth down along the river. And we put that fencing up, I believe, in 2014 or 2015, and now we have a huge canopy of alders lining the whole reach of the South Fork 10 mile we work in. And temperatures in the stream as a result are much lower, much more suitable for fish, and we see a whole lot more salmon using that reach. So it's hugely important. It's something we always think about. And then I talked a lot about large wood structures in the stream, but getting trees growing along the stream is going to provide a future source of natural recruitment of wood into the stream. So we don't have to go out there and build it ourselves. It'll happen naturally.
Absolutely. Same in the Klamath. On Parks Creek Ranch, which is the property we'll be buying next month, there is already some livestock exclusion fencing along the river. But over the next several years, we're going to be undertaking quite a bit of planning and then eventually implementation of planting willows and alders and water birch along the river just to create that sort of cover for fish to create, eventually over time shading. And provide a food source for fish that are in the river. So riparian planting is a big focus of our effort as well inland.
Great. And this might be sort of related. This is a follow-up question. Why do you think the 10 mile specifically has had so much success compared to other systems that are having equal, if not more, effort being put into their restoration? Is there any special sauce at the 10 mile?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the 10 mile is unique and special. It's my favorite river, and so I'm pretty biased, but it's got a lot of things going for it. It has very little development. There's only a couple of landowners through the entire watershed, and it's a pretty big watershed. I think 95% of the watershed's owned by one timber company, and then down as you get closer to the ocean, it's just a couple of large ranches. And so there's not very much development pressure. There's not very many wells being drilled and pulling water out of the stream. So the habitat's more intact in the 10 mile than it is in most other watersheds. It also has a really unique shape. A lot of our watersheds are kind of like, their form is pretty west to east, and the 10 mile is more like a blob. And as a result, it collects rainfall from a wider geographic area. And we see a lot more flow in the 10 mile than we would see in some other streams that are even immediately adjacent along the Mendocino coast. And then that plays into factors around the dynamics of the river mouth opening and closing seasonally at the ocean, which is it does pretty well in the 10 mile. It stays open longer than most other rivers. And it has just a really long history of restoration, not just by TNC, also by the timber companies that previously owned it and by Trout Unlimited and other partners. So I think it's just kind of this special combination of factors that make the 10 mile really, really good for coho.
And this, you may have touched on this a little bit, Peter, I think in your last answer before this one, but could you provide some specific examples of the structures you do to physically rehabilitate the rivers? And Amy, if you want to jump in on this too, I think.
Yeah, I could talk about those all day. That's a big topic. So a lot of I kind of think about our active restoration as falling into two types of categories. One is constructing large log jams in the river itself, and the other is enhancing floodplain habitat. So for the large log jams, we're trying to recreate what would have naturally occurred in these systems when there were old growth redwood trees falling into the stream and then collecting and catching other debris and forming these just massive debris jams. So that's always what we're trying to kind of reconstruct when we build these structures. We're trying to recreate natural conditions, but each structure we build is really based on the particulars of the site where we build it. So they'll all vary depending where they're built. We have some that look one way if we're building them like directly on a bank versus building them like, say, at the head of a gravel bar in the middle of a stream. But they all have common themes. We always try to put big root wads from redwoods or Douglas fir down in the stream and then pin those with other just normal logs. And those provide extremely complex habitat that's really, really good for fish and create a lot of those little hidey holes that they need to escape predators. So they vary. I mean, yeah, we have lots of engineering designs that go into these things, and I'd love to share those, but this might not be the forum.
Thank you. That's great. And hopefully, I think this one might be a quick question. So I'm going to toss this to Amy. I think this may be in reference to something you said. What does it mean to reoperate a dam?
Well, dams tend to have been messing with the natural functional flows of rivers. So the dams will catch and store a lot of those winter and spring flows that a river really needs to depend on. So reoperation of a dam takes a look at what the actual natural function of the river and its needs are when it comes to flow, and working with dam operators to, schedule pulse flows that can help try to achieve what the river winter and spring pulses might have looked otherwise without a dam. So it's working with the dam operator to try to mimic what would have been occurring naturally. That's what that means.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I've got a couple questions here about the role of beaver. Can repopulating beaver in the rivers help the salmon situation?
Absolutely. Yes, 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 yes. On our French Creek property, we have an active busy beaver family already doing some tremendous work in terms of dropping trees and creating dams and, improving groundwater recharge. And we hope that our work on French Creek and also in Parks Creek over time will just allow for more habitat and more expansion of the existing beaver communities that are there. But yes, beaver play a very important role, and it's really an exciting time in California now because, you know, the state has embraced the importance of beavers, and there's just a lot of really exciting emerging science coming out that is really, you know, continuing to document and show how important beavers are to a healthy ecosystem. So they play a big role.
I'll just chime in to say one interesting thing that we've observed. So there's beaver in the Big River. They're not in 10 Mile or Garcia or the rivers we work in, but the Big River is right next door. There's beaver in the Big River, and they've been observed in these North Coast streams because they're so big and flashy. The beaver are bank dwellers, so they create their dens in the bank rather than creating these like cross-channel dams that you typically associate with beaver. But there's still been demonstrated benefits from beaver, even when they're bank dwelling, cohabitating with salmon and other species. So they're still playing an important ecological role. And yeah, we're in TNC, California is in the middle of a kind of comprehensive process of evaluating our lands for potential for beaver reintroduction.
Great. I've got two questions about the spawning cycle. So one is, do the salmon change their 3-year spawning cycle? So every year we'll see more salmon. And then another one was, I noticed you said coho return after 2 years. Here in BC, we find they're usually 3 to 4 years. I'm curious about this difference.
That's interesting. I can't speak to the difference up in BC because I'm not familiar with it, but so coho have their standard life cycle is that 3-year life cycle, but there are varying life history strategies that coho will occasionally employ that deviate from that standard cycle. So sometimes an adult fish will go out to the ocean and come back a year sooner than we would expect them to. We call those jacks. And then sometimes a fish will stay in the freshwater system a year longer than they would normally before going back into the ocean. So they have these kind of diverse life history strategies that I think historically were probably more prevalent. But because their numbers have been so low over the last several decades, they haven't been able to exhibit the full suite of those life history strategies. So they're more confined. And part of the theory of increasing the overall population is that we'll get a greater expression of these life history strategies that will then make them more resilient to like one really bad drought year or one really big wet winter.
This is actually sort of related, I think, to that, those strategies, the survival strategies. So this is a question about the process of taking DNA samples from the salmon to ensure genetic diversity that you mentioned and sort of helping them be more resilient. Could you speak to that? And how you work with the DNA info, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, so a quick synopsis of that. This was all done by our colleague Jennifer Cara and others in cooperation with Army Corps and a whole bunch of partners. But the issue there was basically that in the Navarro River and the Garcia River, which are basically adjacent, the coho salmon populations were so small that there was a big concern about basically inbreeding, like lack of genetic diversity in each of those watersheds. So what they would do is they'd abscond fish from each watershed, raise them to adulthood, and then release them in the opposite watershed. So we were introducing Navarro fish to the Garcia and vice versa in order to increase the genetic diversity.
Kind of pivoting here, one of the questions is, does commercial ocean fishing have a significant impact on coho numbers?
I don't know the exact answer, but I know, I mean, they're a listed species, both federally and state under Endangered Species Act. So, I mean, there might be some bycatch accidentally, but for the most part, at least off the coast of the Klamath, the large Pacific commercial fishing industry is around the fall Chinook salmon run. And sadly, in the Scott River, the fall Chinook are doing quite poorly, largely because by the time they need to enter the Scott River for spawning, in most years, the Scott River is disconnected and they're just unable to get up into the river to get to their spawning grounds. On the flip side, in the Shasta, the fall Chinook salmon are doing quite well. And we've been seeing just great returns of fall Chinook happening every year. largely because the Shasta has water in September for the most part. It might be warm, but it is water. And so I think the commercial fishing industry is really focused around the fall Chinook runs. And there might be some bycatch of coho, but I don't know the answer to that.
What other are there other types of salmon that in other watersheds that might be addressed with similar proactivity? You mentioned Chinook. Are there others that are sort of?
Yeah, I mean, for our work in both the Scott and Shasta, it's a focus on fall Chinook and coho salmon. Sadly, the spring run salmon in the Klamath has largely been extirpated beyond just maybe the Salmon River. But this type of work could be suitable and would, help repopulate and get those populations back. And I would imagine, Peter, that, these restoration actions could benefit steelhead and salmon up and down the California coast.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we design and implement our restoration projects around the habitat needs for coho salmon specifically, but they also provide really good habitat for Chinook and steelhead trout. And we've observed that through our fisheries monitoring. We have a big monitoring program in the 10-mile watershed that's set up. It's going to be 9 years in length, and it's set up to try to kind of suss out the exact impact that our restoration interventions are having on coho in the watershed. And through that intensive fisheries monitoring, we've seen tons of steelhead utilizing our restored habitat features. So it's definitely providing benefits to basically any salmonid in the watershed.
How can you speak to some of the partnership activities TNC is undertaking with local restoration efforts in California, and also any activities that TNC is taking on in its own capacity?
Yeah, I mean, for our work in the Klamath, we wouldn't be able to do this acquisition work if it wasn't in partnership with local organizations on the ground. So what we've been able to do thus far as TNC is, taking the lead on identifying and acquiring key properties and managing those properties, and really working with the diversions and the irrigation to figure out ways to leave that water in stream. But the habitat restoration piece is a whole nother level and body of work that needs to happen. So in the Scott, we've partnered with the Scott River Watershed Council, who is actually leading on the restoration of French Creek on the property that we bought last year. And then similarly in the Shasta, with the purchase of this other property, we're going to acquire the property and manage it and work with the water. And we're leaning on our partner, California Trout, to lead the restoration effort. So it's really a collaborative effort underway here, because we, TNC, couldn't do it all. So we're just incredibly grateful that there's partners that are wanting to work with us and help lead components of this work up here.
One of the questions is around in Siskiyou County, how are you getting buy-in from ranchers to reduce the amount of water being used for agriculture to be left for fish? And are there any likely dam removals on the Shasta River that are being considered?
I'm not aware of any dam removals on the Shasta River being considered. There's been a lot of talk over the years, but I don't think there's anything actually happening on the Shasta. I mean, Siskiyou County is a conservative county. It's a conservative part of Northern California. In the past, the Nature Conservancy has worked with partners to do water leases with landowners, to lease a little bit of their water right in the fall so that they leave their water in stream when fall Chinook are coming up, and we pay the landowner and compensate them for, that water right during that time of year. These days, TNC is really thinking about approaching water by acquiring properties with water rights, and then leaving those water rights in stream. And so we are working with partners to do that. We're communicating to the community, and like I mentioned before, evaluating trade-offs that we have, decisions around how we need to manage that property to be able to achieve our conservation outcomes, but also being careful and thoughtful about the potential economic impacts that it might have to the local community. All of these projects, whether it's water leases or acquisitions, we're also exploring some conservation easement ideas with landowners. we hope will ultimately reduce the regulatory burden that these landowners are experiencing from the state and from endangered species laws, et cetera, so that we can kind of rebalance nature and communities up in the Klamath. So it's, like I said before, it's we have to have those difficult conversations, and some of those conversations are super hard, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. And for the most part, landowners are willing to at least engage and listen. They may not necessarily agree with everything we're doing here, but we are getting traction and have gotten traction with the local community. But it's going to just take an ongoing dialogue. And I think there's been enabling conditions that have kind of moved landowners more to the center, and have kind of encouraged them to start thinking a little differently around their operations. And so I think that's promising for us in Siskiyou County.
I'll just chime in real quick to say that a similar thing has occurred on the North Coast with timber companies, which are kind of, you wouldn't think of as a traditional conservation ally, but they've turned into be some of the most important partners that we have for getting restoration done and bringing coho back to the Mendocino coast.
That's a great point. Thank you. Okay, I have two more questions that are they're like two-parter. One is, do dams contribute to main river channel to the main river channel being incised, and how to get more dynamic interaction with the floodplain during high flows and a more healthy salmon habitat? And I'm going to tack one other extra question onto this, which is the debris behind the Klamath Dam may be rich soil or may be somewhat toxic. What can you do with debris that's going to go downstream? I know there's a lot of
There's a
questions.
lot there, and I am not an expert on like the ins and outs of the Klamath Dam removal. So I would kind of defer your questions to the Klamath Renewal Corporation on kind of their thinking and the science around the debris. Although, most of the debris behind those dams are largely decomposed plants, not a lot of sediment, not a lot of toxins. And so I think they anticipated very little impact of releasing those sediment or those kind of organic plants, sediments for a lack of a better word, down the river. But dams do have a considerable impact to those winter and those spring flushing flows that a river naturally gets. And so in the Shasta River is very incised. You'll see very cut banks of 3 to 8 feet tall because the river hasn't been able to jump out of its channel. It hasn't been able to scour and move around and create little bars. And so, the impacts of dams in the Shasta is definitely kind of this more incised hydrograph where the river isn't able to move around. And I imagine that is the case in a lot of different places as well. I don't know if I got to all your, there was
I
another.
think you did a really good job. Yeah, that was very that was very concise. I know we're kind of getting low on time, so I want to try to fit these in. I love
Can I
this
just say one
question.
thing? There was a question about how to visit the Klamath Dams. If anybody is up near the Oregon border, you just get off I-5 and drive east for 20 minutes, and you can drive along the old reservoirs that were up there. It's a public road. It's absolutely stunning. The Yurok and the Karuk tribe have been doing a ton of revegetation, so the wildflowers have been just constantly blooming along this old bathtub ring, which were the reservoirs behind the dams. So I just encourage a drive if anybody wants to go see where they were. Yeah.
Great advice. Thank you. Do salmon always return to their stream of birth?
Not always, generally, but not always. Sometimes they'll end up in different watersheds than the ones that they were born in. We call those strays. So yeah, sometimes we find a salmon, say in the 10-mile, that has come from really far away. I think we found one from near Santa Cruz once. So sometimes they stray quite far, and that can also be a little bit of a maybe accidental life history strategy where if salmon get extirpated from a watershed, they might get reseeded through strays from an adjacent watershed.
And then relatedly, how do they find their birth river?
They use their noses and they follow like the Earth's magnetic field. It's pretty wild.
Fascinating.
Fascinating. This is a really practical question. Well, actually, I'm going to go to this other question first because it's more related. Are you observing any significant amounts of long migrations of few juveniles doing non-natal rearing in any of these systems? Work I'm doing in Humboldt County is seeing juvenile yearling fish doing long migrations from tributaries and the lower Klamath to Prairie Creek and the Redwood Creek system and vice versa.
I don't know what constitutes long migrations, but I definitely think there are some lifestyle tactics that juvenile salmon are taking in the Klamath, where if there are conditions that are not suitable for them to be, they will travel to go find those conditions. To other tributaries in the Klamath, downstream, upstream. I know there's definitely some movement around, but I don't know. I mean, there's also a huge effort in the Klamath to start synchronizing everybody's method of tracking juvenile movement. So like there's a concerted effort now where if the Yurok tribe picks up a juvenile salmon in any of their places, they can look up the little tag in the salmon and say, oh, this came from the Scott River, or, I don't know if Mendocino Coast salmon are in this network, but they're starting to get a real sophisticated tracking system in. So we are going to, I think, over the years, understand more about how far these juvenile salmon actually travel.
Yeah, we've seen
Like,
them through our fisheries monitoring in the 10 mile. We've seen them moving around a lot, and I think they move more than we maybe previously assumed they did. We've seen some fish that we've tagged way up in like high up in the watershed in the North Fork of the 10 mile come all the way down, travel 22 miles to the estuary, and then back upstream the South Fork and rear in our habitat features that we've constructed. So they're traveling a long ways to come use that habitat. If it's good habitat, they'll find it, I think. Kind of always have the perspective of if you build it, they'll come.
We have one last question. Do you have any advice? This is, I think, a question that a lot of us wonder. Do you have any advice about what kind of salmon to buy? I've seen advice that generally wild Alaskan is the most sustainable. Is that correct? Any tips?
I would follow the Monterey Bay Aquarium's ratings for fish sustainability. A lot of grocery stores will have them. They'll be like green and yellow or red. Buy the green ones.
Excellent. Well, I think that's actually it for questions. You did an amazing job. Thank you so much for joining us for the future of salmon, and join us on October 30th for the future of clean and green energy. We'll see you next time.